My name is Tim Gourley. I know a few of you guys. I don't know all of you. It's been a while since I've really been involved in the Ruby community here in Oklahoma City. It seems like life kind of, threw some curveballs here and there, but that's okay. I am a developer for Phase 2, hence all the cool hacky sacks. If you guys are wanting a hacky sack and have a cool comment or question or whatever, I will throw it at you and try not to hurt you. I can't make any promises though. I've been a professional Rubyist for over a decade, which is pretty cool. I've been able to work with the language that I love and use daily, and get paid for it, which is, I feel very fortunate about. And if you guys are wanting, you can follow me on various social medias. I've got the bird site up there with Twitter and Instagram, and my GitHub is just /Brada. You can find all my projects, and the code that I'm talking about today will be up there. And I'm also on Mastodon on the ruby.social instance. And I got some web stuff. My timgourley.com is just, I haven't really maintained that, but it's there. And then I have my running blog at night.coffee, because coffee has a lot to do with running, and so does night, I guess. But it's just a repurposed domain, and I like it. So I really thought it was weird when Aaron put the sign-up sheet for talking on Ruby, that we were going to be talking about, you wanted something about apis, right? So as we all know, apis is the Latin word for the genus that honeybees belong to. So I thought, well, why not? Let's branch out a little bit. We'll deep dive into some honey. And but then I realized, no, he's talking more about the application programming interface, or APIs, right? So man, it's been a while since I've given a talk on Ruby too. Like the last one I gave was 8 years and 2 months ago, where I was actually speaking at the previous incarnation of this group, the OKRB. It kind of fell by the wayside, and then Michael and Aaron and everybody kind of came together and kind of spearheaded this group, this new version of the group. And I remember giving that talk, and it was over, actually it was over like microservices and dealing with APIs using Sinatra. And it was kind of funny. I remember the exact day that it happened, because my phone kept buzzing during the presentation. It was just kept going off, and I was trying to ignore it and just talk through it and not worry about it. And at the end of the talk, I pulled up my phone, and my phone immediately started buzzing again, and I answered the phone. It was my wife, and she's like, "Tim, you need to get to the hospital now." I'm thinking, holy crap, what's going on? And we were expecting at the time, and we had 2 months to go, and we were still just getting started taking birthing classes and whatnot to kind of learn how to deal with the birthing process and having a kid and whatnot. But apparently, no, they were going to take the baby at that point, right then and there. And so I had to book it from, we were at the co-working facility that was downtown then was the OKC Coco. I don't know if any of you guys remember that place, but it was not as cool as this building by far. But it was still pretty cool. So I had to book it from the Coco all the way down to Norman to the hospital off Tecumseh, and it was the fastest I've ever driven, and it was great, but it was awesome. And I had my son Mason at the time that day, and it was cool. And I have not given a Ruby talk since, which it's not any fault of his. It's just I haven't really talked. Anyway, let's talk about APIs. So it's a set of clearly defined methods for communications between components. All right. So if you're talking from system A to system B, or from code A to system B, or whatever, whenever you do any of that type of communications, chances are you're using an API. And there are different kind of tiers of APIs we can kind of go into and talk about, because you're using them all the time, whether you know it or not, really. So if you're working with a library or a framework, such as working with a Ruby gem. So if you install Ruby gem and you're using that, you're working with that Ruby gem's API. And it may also be working with other APIs. If you're doing any iOS or Android development, you're working with the framework, the APIs to deal with the hardware and the other software to make your app work. We also have operating system level APIs, right? So if you're writing code for Windows or for Linux, you may be using the POSIX API or the Windows API, or you may be using some Mac APIs to write software for the Mac. So There's APIs on that level as well. So you're basically using the code and the documentation in order to make that stuff work. If you're familiar with Java RMI, I'm so sorry, and I feel really bad for you, but you know, it's another type of API is dealing with remote method invocation. So what that means is your code is basically just calling a method just like it normally would, but behind the scenes it's doing some stuff to kind of communicate. It may not be over the web, it may not be over any interface that you're familiar with, but it's communicating remotely with another machine to do the workload remotely and then send you back the results. And then there's the web APIs, which we're all probably more familiar with or want to be familiar with, and that's kind of what we're going to get into is the web APIs using stuff like HTTP. HTTP itself is an API. You're kind of communicating with it on various levels. Then we have web services via stuff like SOAP. If you've ever dealt with a web service, like with SOAP and WSDL and all that stuff that goes with that, that's a type of web API. Then there's also the more friendly and more easier to work with web services that are built upon REST, the RESTful web services. And we'll get into a little bit of that as we go through the slides. So let's go ahead and focus on the web for fun and profit. Don't worry about the little disclaimer text. It's just, it's my EULA, and we're going to pretend we all agree with it, so that way it gives me complete access to all your private information. And actually, it's just really a quote from Monty Python and the Holy Grail from the credits, so don't worry about it. All right, I'm going to quickly go over some terms. I don't want this to become one of those like presentations where we just kind of list definitions out, and that's really a snoozer. So we're going to just quickly go over that, so we're kind of all on the same page. We all know what's going on. So first, I want to talk about an endpoint. We all kind of understand that in order to kind of communicate with like a web service, we need to know where to contact the web service, right? And so that's what kind of an endpoint is. It's a URI, or like what's in the address bar, that tells you where you can call this web service. And that's kind of where your responses are going to be coming from as well. And I mentioned SOAP, and that's the Simple Object Access Protocol. And really that's like XML-based messaging protocol for exchanging information. And it uses kind of an XML document called a WSDL document, which kind of groups different services together, kind of tells you how to access them, where to go, what you can expect to get back. It's pretty detailed, and it's kind of scary and hard to work with these type of web services because they're very difficult to consume. In my experience, over the years, they're kind of difficult to deal with, and I apologize if you've had to suffer through them yourselves. Fun point in trivia: when you're making a SOAP request, or if you're working with the SOAP web service, it does not have to go over HTTP. Like the back end of like a SOAP web service can be something even over like SMTP. So it can use different back end services, different layers it can use. It's really kind of weird. I can't imagine making a SOAP request and having it go over like and send an email or deal with SMTP, but apparently that's a thing. Then we get to the part that most of us deal with, like when we're writing code with Ruby or whatever language we're working with, and that's the RESTful web services, which stands for Representational State Transfer. And that's just like a gobbledygook word for meaning that we have this standard uniform set of URIs and verbs that go along with it, and you send it one thing and you expect to get back something else by convention, right? So like if you make a request to a GET request over HTTP to /users, you expect to receive back a collection of a user's resource. And that's really what that means. And if you specify users /1, you expect to get a specific user back with that ID as 1. And we have the different verbs that we deal with, such as get, post to create, put, or patch to be able to update, depending on how you want to update, delete to destroy your resource, head if you're wanting to just get some information back, that sort of thing. And all these HTTP verbs kind of have meaning when it comes to a RESTful web service. And we deal with the concept of resources, which are basically just your objects that you're manipulating or receiving back. All right, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these other terms here. I'm just going to kind of mention them briefly because we write these web services to, RESTful or whatever, and sometimes we kind of tend to forget or think of like, security stuff as kind of like, we'll deal with it later, But it's important to know that a lot of times when you're dealing with a web service, you're dealing with like an author and access token. So it's basically a little string, a little bit of information that says, I have the proper credentials to be able to access this web service. And so a lot of times that will be sent around in the web services. And we'll see that come up when we get into the code demonstration I'm dealing with. You may have heard of OAuth or OAuth 2.0 or the various versions of that. If you've ever gone to a website and seen like log in with GitHub or log in with Facebook or whatever, that's kind of using like a variation or version of OAuth or something built on top of it. And what that does is it allows you to kind of log into one site, but then be able to log into another site and have that first site tell you, yeah, they're good to go. And you can basically like say you're logging into a site and you click on the login with GitHub. It'll take you over to GitHub and say, hey, do you want this site to have like access to like your information here? And you'll be like, yep, I sure do. Or no, don't let them delete my repos, please. On top of that, you have something called OpenID Connect, which is allows kind of a user to authenticate into multiple websites or web services with a single set of credentials. It's kind of like the OAuth part. But it builds on top of that to provide both the authentication and authorization using, and it kind of builds up an identity for you using like a JSON web token, which is just another like kind of author access token, but it just says that you are who you are and allows you to have that single point of identity as well. Microsoft actually uses the OpenID Connect whenever you're logging into their websites. And their various like portals and stuff all use the OpenID. So whenever you log into your Microsoft account, you have all of a sudden you have access to all these different websites that they provide and offer. But we're not going to get too hung up on that. We're not going to really see that come up in this particular talk. But it's just kind of interesting that we have all these ways of kind of dealing with authentication that goes beyond just like providing a username and password whenever you want to log into like a web service. So it makes it a little more seamless, but also a little more complicated to code around sometimes. I kind of wanted to break things up into two different sides of the coin here, both consuming APIs and then providing your own API. With Ruby, it actually becomes very easy to kind of do both. When you're consuming an API, there's multiple ways you could go about it. So like say you're wanting to work with like the Facebook API. You're wanting to manage your Facebook page with Ruby code or have it manage like your friends list, whatever they're offering this week as far as their API is concerned. I've used it before to kind of manage advertising campaigns and optimize them for people who are wanting to build out ads. So with Ruby, you might want to just use like a predefined gem such as the FB graph gem, and that will allow you to kind of consume their API, and all you deal with is the Ruby code and the documentation for the API in order to build your application. But it's also really easy to work directly with the web APIs with a variety of the both built-in HTTP type libraries or external gems such as the HTTP gem or the HTTP party. There's various tools that allow you to kind of easily connect with an application and deal with their API without really having to write like a real significant amount of code either. You basically just kind of make a request, get your JSON back or whatever your payload is, and then just deal with it. And then providing APIs, we'll get into that a little bit. It's pretty easy to write like your own API with Ruby on Rails. Offers now like its API mode, which kind of strips away a lot of the front end stuff. It allows you to write just a pure simple JSON-based API. Or you can use a micro framework like Sinatra. So in order to show off like consuming an API, I wanted to come up with like an interesting problem. And one of the things that we have in our family is, when we go out to a restaurant, when we do, it's always like a really contentious decision on where to eat. where do we go? We have a hard time making decisions. There's just too many choices in the area. So I figured that we want to be able to choose a restaurant and make them battle each other, and let the winner decide who is going to be the restaurant that we eat at that night. All right, so I wanted to build an app to do this, and I decided that, well, the best thing to start with is to use like Yelp. And Yelp has a pretty cool API that developers can take advantage of, and it's actually really easy to work with. Let me go ahead and see if I can pop into this. Exit the slideshow. Wow, there we go. And I found a lot of times when you're wanting to get into dealing with a new API, if you just go to their website, a lot of times down at the bottom of the site, they'll have like a link for developers or like an API link or something. And what that will do is that usually takes you to like their documentation. And so this is the documentation site for the documentation portal for Yelp, and they have like a whole bunch of different things you can do. And their current version with their Fusion API is what they're calling their current version. Authentication is really easy. You log in with your account, and you can go and create like an API token, an auth token. And then what you do is you just send that auth token over in the header of your request whenever you're wanting to make a request, and that's it, you're authenticated. Then you can go ahead and use all their APIs like you would normally want to. So for example, like if we want to search for businesses, they have the documentation here where you can just call this businesses/search. And you just make a GET request to that, and then send over whatever parameters you want to kind of customize your request. And then they'll send you back a response. And down at the bottom of the documentation, they actually tell you what the response looks like. So you know what you're getting back and how to parse it. So it's really easy to work with. Their documentation is actually pretty good. It's one of the better ones I've seen. Some sites with their APIs, you kind of have to hunt for the proper documentation and just kind of spend a lot of time pulling out your hair, just trying to get it to work. But this one is pretty good. All right, so let's see here with my next slide. All right, so yeah, so we have this URL here that we can get to for the documentation, and it gives us the endpoint that get HTTPS, blah, 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 the business search. So all we have to do is send a GET request to that endpoint, and then we can define these terms, and I kind of pared it down to the ones that are interesting for this particular application. So we want to send the search term, and they're very forgiving. You can send restaurants or tacos or Starbucks or a combination of things, and it'll return back the data that it thinks you want. Location is actually really forgiving too. I was able to send back like coordinates and full address, or just like even a zip code. So the zip code is pretty sufficient because you'll probably want to just stick to kind of a geographic area that's kind of just in the range of your driving or whatever. And you can also send a limit, so it caps out at sending 50 responses back, but you can send whatever you want. So default of 20, so it'll give you 20 businesses back and if you don't specify it. So it's kind of neat. All right, so this is a quote from Why the Lucky Stiff. And this quote has stuck with me over the years. If you guys don't know who Why the Lucky Stiff is, he was quite a character in Ruby history back almost like a decade ago. He had his book that kind of a lot of Rubyists at the time kind of cut their teeth on and learned Ruby from, and is full of comics like this Chunky Bacon thing down at the bottom there. But this quote really stuck with me. It's like of his. It's like, when you don't create things, you become defined by your taste rather than your ability. Your tastes only narrow and exclude people, so create. And so that's kind of why I kind of encourage people to kind of take on little toy applications like this, or just whatever, just code for fun. Just get out there and do something, create code. Release a gem. It doesn't matter if it's going to be used by a lot of people or if it's going to be used by just yourself. Get out there and just create code, have fun. You learn by doing a lot of times. If you're anything like me, that's how you learn, is you learn by doing things. And it just kind of helps expand your knowledge and yourself. And so I kind of want to get into some of the code that I used to create this. I was going to actually do this like as a live code, but in the interest of time, we'll just kind of go through the code itself instead of like, hunting and pecking on a keyboard and fixing typos. Nobody wants to see typo fixing, really. All right, so I created a program called Clinch Clash, and let's see here. That's kind of showing up okay. Is that big enough for everybody in the back there? Okay, awesome. Just want to make sure here. So what I did is I used the gem bundler. And if you're not familiar with the gem bundler, I recommend going out and Googling it and looking up all the cool things you can do with it, because it's more than just setting up a gem file and then having it install all the dependencies for your code for you. It can generate skeletons of code too, and that's what I did in this case. I did a bundle gem and then Clinch Clash. And what that did is that created the skeleton of this application for me to release it as a Ruby gem. And that's pretty cool. And so I want to kind of go over just a few of the files in here. It creates like this gem spec file that you need to be able to release a Ruby gem on a site like Ruby Forge or wherever you're wanting to release it. And it fills out everything for you, but I went through and added my stuff here, like the description, homepage, blah, blah, blah. The interesting part's down at the bottom, though. I kind of want to talk about the dependencies a little bit. So for this particular case, I wanted to add the HTTP gem instead of using the default built-in net HTTP that comes with the standard library of Ruby. The reason I went with this over the built-in is because the HTTP gem kind of makes things a little bit simpler for real simple web requests. You can chain your calls together, so I can like set a header and then call dot and then make my request and do dot and just kind of go down the chain and have things really kind of tightly working together and in a very nice DSL. It also adds support for adding like the bearer tokens or whatever you need for providing your API token to the web service. Very easy. If I look back over here, I have the documentation for that pulled up right here. It's at http://http on GitHub. And they make it really easy to send an authorization header. This is what Yelp was looking for right here, is this bearer token. And really, this is just the API token that they issue you whenever you go to the developer website and request that you create like a new application token. And so all you have to do is send that like with this one call and you're authorized. Boom, you can start using the API. It's pretty easy. All right, so I've got a couple other things here. Like this is just a gem I wrote that kind of manages configuration files. It's just kind of a wrapper for dealing with YAML. And what I did is I stored the credentials in a YAML file that's going to be in my home directory. So that way, like if I do release this as a gem, you can do a gem install blah, and when you run the program, it's going to look for those credentials in your home directory. When you're writing your own code, you may want to do it a different way. You might want to have like an environment variable or something that has your API credentials, especially if it's going to be something that's going to be like a website itself, like if it's something you're deploying to Heroku or other sites. So you can set up like your secrets and environment variables and not have to deal with checking it into a repository or anything like that. I'm using Launchy because this gem is pretty interesting. What it does is, have you ever used like the open command on the command line on OS X? Or something similar to that. So you type in open and a file name, and what it does is it opens that file in whatever associated program it is. So like if you say open.readme.txt, it'll open up like TextMate or whatever is your default with that file in there from the command line. This is just like a cross-platform way of doing that within your code. So I can have it launch like a URL, for example, and it'll open up your web browser regardless of what operating system you're on. So that's what that's for. Rainbow is just going to add some colors to my terminal, not a big deal. And then I have all my development dependencies here. Now, the gem bundler, whenever it sets up your gem, it puts all of your dependencies here in the gem spec because that's kind of what you want for when you're releasing a gem. So that way that system knows what dependencies it needs to install when you install the gem. So it puts it here instead of in the gem file itself. So if I look at the gem file, you can see what it does is it just calls this gem spec here, so it knows to look in the gem spec for the dependencies instead of here in the gem file. All right, so I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit over here to the Yelp file here. I have lib, clinch clash, and then yelp.rb. And this is the API that the class made to interface with the Yelp API. And I'll just kind of step through the code a little bit and kind of tell you what it's doing, and so we'll see how easy it is to kind of consume one of these APIs. So first off, in the initializer, basically I'm just passing in the API key because other parts of my application are going to be loading that information either from disk or from an environment variable, and then it's going to just shove it into this when you create an instance of this Yelp class. And I just set up like the default API host and a search path so that we know that this is where we're going to hit. This is going to be the endpoint we hit. And now I apologize in advance. This probably isn't the cleanest code. I just wanted to kind of make it simple to understand and follow. There's going to be definitely better ways to kind of organize the code, but I just wanted to make it very simple to kind of read and follow along with. So the main thing you're going to call on this class is the search method. And so when you create your Yelp instance, you'd say yelp.search, and you'd pass it a search term and a zip code. So that's just the easiest thing to work with just to get the responses back you want. And then what I do is we call this get businesses method. It's basically the same thing, but this is the one that actually makes the API call, and it just returns back the response that it gets from the server. And we just do some basic simple error checking here. So if we get back an error from the web request, so if we goof something up in our call, it responds with an error, and then we can just, in this case, I'm just putting out the error message and exiting. You might want to handle it some other way, raise an exception or do some other code, whatever you want to do. After that, then we have a response, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to build business results, and basically that's going to just parse that response back and put it in objects that we're going to deal with in the Ruby code, and then go on with our lives. So the meat of the application for dealing with the API is right here in this get businesses. So I built up the URL, and I probably could have done this in the initializer instead of right here, where I just kind of take the API host and the search path, the API path, and just put them together into one variable. And then I set up these params here. And so these are the parameters that we're sending along. Like we saw in the documentation that we needed term, we needed location, and we could use limit. And so that's just where we're building that up here in this Ruby hash. And we're going to use the HTTP gem to make that request with that information. So here we call the HTTP auth, and we build up that bearer token. So we basically send our API key in the header. And then we chain it and we call it .get because we're making a GET request to this particular API with this URL and the parameters. And what we get back is just a response, and I'm calling .parse on it because what that's going to do is it's going to take that raw text and kind of turn it into JSON that we can deal with in our application. So we call that, we get the businesses. So basically up here, this response is going to be just JSON data, and then we pass it into this build business results. And here what we're doing is we're doing some fancy tap dancing, which, has anybody seen this kind of like way of doing variables in Ruby before where you're calling .tap? So what we're doing is we're basically creating like this new array here, this empty array, and we're tapping into it, and we're providing that a block, and we're giving that block a name. So basically, this result here becomes this way to get into this array. So we're building up this array here, this empty array, inside the block, which is kind of a cool way of doing things because since Ruby also returns the last evaluated statement at the end of the method, it relieves us from having to say like, results equals empty array, and then do stuff with the results, and then at the end of the method saying return results or just results. So it kind of makes the language look a little fancier, a little cleaner in my opinion. So I use tap a lot whenever I'm doing this code. If you look through my code, you'll see it all over the place. So basically what we do is we make sure we have a response, we make sure that we have businesses in the response. That's kind of what we're looking for based on what we saw in the documentation on Yelp's website. And so then we loop over each of these businesses that are in the response, and then we push onto results. So we're pushing onto this array this empty array here, a new hash that we're building up containing a name, a rating, and a URL, because that's really all that we're interested in for this particular application. And then we just basically end up with this array of hashes that contain all the businesses. And that's it. That's all there is to that. So I'm not going to get too deep into the actual code here. I mean, the main class I have here is this battle. And whenever you create it, it goes through and sets everything up. It gets your config. It creates the instance of the Yelp API class that we just created, passing in the API key. And then what it does is it calls these methods here, init players, which fetches the data from the API and builds up these player model classes, for lack of a better word, just plain old Ruby classes called players. And then it just gathers the places together, and that's kind of what that does. And then we have this doit method here that takes all the players that we got, basically everything back from the API, and it just has a little game where they battle each other out. And we just decide the winner from there. So I can kind of just show it off real quick if we... Clinch clash. All right. So I have it prompting for a number of players. So this is our limit of what we're making to the API. So if I could just pass in 5. And a Yelp search term, let's see here. Let's do chicken, since we had the golden chick today. So why not? We want to have chicken. And the zip code, what is the zip code here for star space? Does anybody know that off the top of their head?
73106 is close.
We'll say 73106, why not? And provided that the internet gods are smiling upon us today, and that live presentations always have something going wrong, let's see what we get. Hey, look, we got back some responses, right? So Chef Ray's Street Eats, is anybody eating there? Is that any good? So you can see we're also building up stats for it too. So I'm using that rating to kind of randomly create hit points and a hit rating and defense, because they're going to battle it out. In future versions, I really want to give them armor and items and stuff, and so maybe little avatars or something. But Waffle Champion, it's a good place, but it's not really what I think of when I think of, well, yeah, it's chicken and waffles. That's good. That's really good. Cheevers is good. The Press and Pollo Campero. Is that any good? Is anybody eating there? Yeah, okay, that's pretty good. All right, good deal. All right, so then this is just a listing of them, and now they get to battle each other out. So round 1, the Press versus Pollo Campero. And I have an array of just random attacking phrases right there. So the Press beat down Pollo Campero. They tickled him, and they hit him, and it exploded. And Pollo Campero died, sorry. So the Press wins this round, and so it goes on from there. So now we have Chef Ray's Street Eats versus the Press, and now we have bam, 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 and then Chef Ray's Street Eats wins. Round 3. All right, Cheevers versus Waffles Champion, and Cheevers wins. Okay, I can see that. And then boom, Cheevers versus Chef Ray's Street Eats, and then Lucky Strike. That's a kind of a critical hit. That's basically if the random number generator, I have that hard-coded, if the random number generator is 42, then that's a critical hit. So just so you know, it's the answer, right? All right, so then boom, we have our winner, and it opens up and takes you directly to the URL. That's why I use that launchy gem to be able to take you to the URL for the restaurant, in this case, Cheevers, and then there you go. Now you can know where to go, and it came out bloody, and it won. Yes, Aaron? Is this gem publicly available yet? That's what he asked. It's not available as a gem, but it is on GitHub where you can clone it and play with it and customize it yourself. Fully documented. I'll have the URL for it in another slide there. Is there any questions about consuming an API with Ruby in this manner? You saw how easy it was to basically build up just a web request using the documentation that you find on the website and using some basic gems to be able to communicate and manipulate that data. Does anybody have any questions about what we've seen so far? Does anybody just want like a hacky sack? Is that? A fun fact is like almost like every day when the weather's nice outside, like around 3:30, 4 o'clock or something, we'll kind of break from work and just like go outside and just throw around one of these for a while, and we pretend that we're all really good at hacky sack, but really we're horrible. I mean, it is really, really bad. These guys can really attest to that. All right, so let's continue on. We'll talk about creating an API with Ruby. So it's pretty dang simple anymore to create an API. With Rails, modern versions of Rails have this --API flag that you can pass to the Rails generator to create a new application, and that gives you just the bare bones, what you need to get like an API up and going. It uses kind of a limited set of middleware instead of the full stack that you get when you just do Rails new blah, blah, blah. You can use the Rails middleware to kind of see the differences if you do like something with an API versus that's not, but what it boils down to is that you basically skip like a lot of your views, the view helpers. You do get some helpers, but not a lot of the view helpers, and asset stuff. So you're not going to have to worry about the asset pipeline, and you're not going to get like a lot of the Webpack stuff or anything like that. So it's just real basic, just call and response type code that you get in your controllers. To the point where you actually the controllers actually inherit from a different base class. So when you generate a class, you'll notice like in your application controller, that it inherits from Action Controller API instead of Action Controller base. And that is how it kind of gets around like loading a lot of this extra crufty middleware that you really don't want if you're dealing with an API. That being said, in practice, whenever I've been writing APIs, I'll still need to have some way of managing users. And I end up wanting something like devise. And so I kind of cheat, and I will go ahead and do a new Rails application without the --API. And that way I can manage my views and still have all the helpers and whatnot needed for using devise to kind of build like my user management portal. But then I'll just respond with JSON with the rest of my controllers. So that's one strategy you can take. Another one would be to be able to create like a full-blown JSON-only API where you create your users and manage your users directly through web APIs, which that's kind of intriguing to me. And I think I'm going to give myself a project coming up to do something like that, where I'm just doing everything purely through the API. And that way, like I can really separate my web interface out and do like a Vue.js front end that is purely Vue.js, and then have it talk to a Rails API only backend, and just see how that works out. I may go running and screaming, I don't know. But it's pretty easy way of doing that. And the alternative way you can do it is by building your API with Sinatra. And if you guys know me or have known me for a long time, I've been a big fan of Sinatra. I've talked about it more than anything else in Ruby at the Ruby talks I've given in the past. It's just a cool way of writing little micro frameworks. So you're basically building up little small rack applications that you can build up with a very clean DSL to describe like your API or your application. So you actually have like a method names that you define that are HTTP verbs. So you have a get method or a post method, and you provide that with your URI that you're wanting to deal with that on. So like you'd have get/users, and then that would return all your users. And but the cool thing about Sinatra is it's really lightweight and pared down compared to something like the behemoth of Rails. It's not tied to any particular ORM. It's got a very clean DSL, but because it's very clean and not very heavy, you don't get a lot of the niceties that you do get with Rails, because Rails actually provides a lot of stuff behind the scenes that you may not really think about. Like it has some pretty cool stuff for dealing with IP spoofing detection. It has the built-in strong parameter stuff in Rails, I think 4 on and whatever. I forget when they added that, but just to kind of make your request that much more secure. Conditional get, e-tags, like a lot of the built-in caching stuff that we're dealing with. Rails provides for you that, and a lot of this stuff you can get in Sinatra, but you have to do a lot of extra legwork on your own. It's not built in, so there's that trade-off. You could kind of go in the middle of the road by using like a Sinatra-based framework, something like Padrino, which I've used a lot in the past. I still have a project out on GitHub that is a Padrino project to kind of show off how to work with that, but it's kind of fun. It's kind of a middle of the road. It has some things that adds on top of Sinatra, but it's still not as bloated as Rails can be. All right, so let's go ahead and look at just like an example of like an API in Rails first. We'll start with that. So I have this repository built up, and I'll have the links to this so everybody can kind of check it out too. Or if you go to github.com/brata, I don't know if I pinned this one, but I pinned the Clinch Clash one, so you guys can see that directly there. But I built the same API here in Rails and Sinatra to kind of show off the differences, and I'll just kind of briefly talk about this. I won't spend too much time like getting into the nitty-gritties of it. But this API is one that manages two different types of resources. And if I look here at the routes file here, you can see the Rails routes for resources for restaurants and for reviews. So I'm kind of sticking with that whole Yelp theme. So this one allows you to manage, like through JSON, just like a list of restaurants and reviews, and you can go through there and just do all sorts of different, CRUD type stuff through JSON. And let's just kind of get into the code real quick, and I'll just show off like how different it is for Rails versus Sinatra, just to kind of show you what you can expect. It's like the restaurants controller here for the Rails app. With Rails, you define like your different methods that are based more on like the CRUD action. It's more like concerned with the CRUD action that you're dealing with for the actual resource. So like if you're going to do like an update, a destroy, a create, whatever. So the methods are named like that. So your index is going to be the one that usually shows off all of your requests. And so I put the comments in here for get/restaurants because that's the URI endpoint that is generated whenever you hit this controller action, this index action. And what we do is we're just using like active record to get all of the restaurants back, and then we have this JSON response here. And this is JSON response. This is kind of a custom concern, like in the controllers directory. I have these concerns here, and this one here defines this JSON response method. All it is just wrap around, like respond with JSON, with the status and all that stuff. So it's nothing interesting, but it just makes this code look a little cleaner. And then we also have like a show method to show an individual one, and we're just showing the restaurant that we've loaded. And we've loaded that with this before action, set restaurant, where we just make a call to active record.find with an ID that you're passing in through the URI. And then you can do the create with does the post. And so basically all we're doing is we're just doing a active record create on the parameters that we're passing in using strong parameters. So we're only accepting what we are expecting. And an update, Rails kind of does a put for the update. Put typically, like by the definition, means that you're replacing the entire document with something new. And if you do a patch, you're basically updating only the things that changed. Rails kind of plays a little fast and loose with it. You can actually just do a partial update if you want. So it just doesn't really matter. It's just semantics. And then delete and destroy. And so that's really all there is to that. The reviews controller is basically the same, but it's kind of nested underneath like a particular restaurant. And since I'm kind of running short on time, I'll just dig into the Sinatra one real quick. With the Sinatra app, everything is basically in one file. That's one of the cool things about Sinatra is it allows you to do that, but you typically when you get into like doing something for production, you want to separate this out. So I put like a big disclaimer here that I put my active record models here because I'm still using active record. But you don't want to do this for real. You'd want to split this out into its own file. But it just has many belongs to. There's no validations. It's real simple. And so here we have the definition of the class. And we register it with Active Record, so we're going to be using Active Record. And we're making sure that we tell it that we're doing just JSON, so we're sending the content type always to application JSON. And then we just have some helper methods, kind of like we did with the concerns in the Rails app. But here's the meat of the application. We have these get restaurants, and you see how clean that looks. I mean, instead of like having to map the actual like HTTP web request, the RESTful request, to a Rails method, like an action controller action, instead we just go directly to what we're wanting, and it's a lot cleaner API to deal with. So we have get restaurants, which gets all the restaurants, and we just return the JSON. And the same thing here for getting an individual restaurant, we just get it based on the ID and return whatever response there. With and I'm specifying patch here for the Sinatra application to kind of show that we're just basically updating the existing document instead of replacing the entire thing altogether. But really, you can hit it with both verbs and it works. And post is the same way, and delete, we just do a destroy and we just return some status codes. So it's a little bit cleaner to have, like, for a small API, it's really cleaner to have that in one file, but you may want to split it out. So that's the difference between that and consuming it. I'm still really running out of time, so I can't really show you that it does work. But I will show you here, like if we call this restaurant get here in Postman, you can see, boom, we get it. We get our list of restaurants there from the API. And the same for the Sinatra. We can do the same thing. Load that. We just calling get to that URI, and we get the responses back. So it's pretty easy to build these up, but it just depends on your needs of your application, what you're wanting to do with it, whether you want it to be something more robust and it's going to be part of a bigger application. You might want to consider doing the Rails API, so you get a lot of the niceties with that. Or you can stick with Sinatra. All right, so let's go back to the presentation real quick, and let's talk about what we can do with the API. Now that you got like a basic one up, testing. Please always test. Please don't leave out the test like I did in these things. Consider using something like active model serializers, because that's going to help you customize your JSON instead of just using to JSON and getting the default. You may want to leave out like the timestamps that the active record leaves on the models whenever you create it, that sort of thing. Look at the rack cores gem to enable cores, which is the cross-origin resource sharing. That way you can kind of like decide to like share this data with your API across different domains without having to deal with a lot of the cross-scripting pitfalls there. Consider namespacing your URI, so putting it under like API/v1, whatever, so that way you can version it. So that way if you release a new version of it, you still have the support for your previous version. And also look at the rack attack gem, which is a really cool gem for kind of throttling requests. So if you have a problematic user who's trying to hit your application every few seconds, like with thousands of requests, you can kind of throttle them and say, hey, step back. And look at the JWT gem to look at creating your own JSON web tokens for dealing with authentication and authorization. All right, well, that's really all I have. Don't have a lot of time left over, but if there are any questions, let me know. I'll try to address them. And the URLs for the Rails and Sinatra app is on the top, and the Clinch Clash is there at the bottom. Feel free to fork it and or just laugh at the quality of the code or just enjoy it. So anybody have any questions or anything? Yes. There you go. Anybody else? Yes.
Have you used OpenAPI or anything that like forces you to use a specific format for your API?
The question is, have I used OpenAPI or something that forces me to use a specific format for the API? And I really haven't. I've seen it before, and it looks like it would be pretty nice for kind of standardizing like your API. So it's something to consider when you're building your own, to kind of look at and decide if you want something that's a little like fast and loose and flexible, just freeform it, or if you're wanting to use OpenAPI. But I haven't really used it before. Hackersack? Yeah. There you go. Yeah. Aaron, what's up?
I've got a little comment on that. So
Yeah.
I deal with building a JSON API. It's got a whole format made by Yehuda Katz and a couple other people. But that's what you're talking about, active model serializers. There's a one-line piece of code that you can say, use JSON API, and it will auto-format your whole output based on that. So I don't know what the Open API is, but I think it might be the same thing, but you can use that. It's pretty cool, right? Just a comment.
Yeah, so his comment was, if you couldn't hear what he was saying, is talking about the JSON API, which when used in conjunction with something like active model serializers, it basically makes it brain dead simple to format your document like per that standard. And just adding one line to your code there, to your serializer, and then boom, it formats it out there for you. So Aaron, you probably have a couple of these already, but there you go. All right, so anything else? Anybody have any other questions? All right, well, thank you guys. It's been